The morning sun spilled through the large windows of Maple Street Diner, painting golden streaks across the polished counter. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air, blending with the chatter of customers who had made this place part of their daily routine. To any outsider, it looked like just another busy breakfast rush. But if you looked closely, there was something unusual happening, something you might miss unless you were paying attention. At the center of it all was Emily. She was a young waitress, probably in her mid-20s, with tired eyes that still managed to shine with warmth. Her uniform was neatly pressed, though slightly faded from countless washes, and her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun that had already begun to unravel after hours of rushing between tables. She moved quickly from one booth to another, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups with the kind of practiced grace only years in food service could teach. But there was something different about Emily that morning, something that set her apart from the other servers. Her right hand was wrapped tightly in a makeshift bandage, the kind that suggested she had done it herself in a hurry. And though she tried to hide it, every movement made it clear that the injury was painful. She held trays with her left hand, poured coffee slowly to keep from spilling, and winced ever so slightly when the weight of a plate pressed too heavily on her injured wrist. Most customers didn't notice. They were too busy scrolling through their phones, talking about work, or rushing to finish breakfast before heading out. A few gave her polite smiles when she apologized for being slower than usual, but no one really asked why. That's the thing about the world sometimes, people see only what they want to see. But one man in the corner booth did notice. He was quiet, dressed in simple clothes that made him blend in with the early crowd. To anyone else, he looked like just another customer, sipping his coffee while reading the morning paper. But his eyes followed Emily carefully. He noticed how she used her body to compensate for her weakness, how she carried plates pressed against her hip to avoid putting too much strain on her hand, how she took extra steps to steady herself before delivering a heavy tray, how she forced a smile even when her face tightened with pain. Emily never stopped moving. When a little boy spilled orange juice all over the table, she hurried over with a towel, kneeling with one hand while balancing the pitcher in the other. When an older couple asked for extra syrup, she darted back to the counter, ignoring the throbbing ache in her wrist. And when a customer grew impatient and snapped his fingers, she offered a smile so gentle and kind it almost made his rudeness feel undeserved. That was Emily. Always giving, always pushing, always hiding her own pain so others wouldn't see. What made it more remarkable was that she wasn't just fighting through her injury, she was doing it while still radiating warmth. Each time she stopped by a table, she asked how customers were doing, remembered small details about their usual orders, and treated them like old friends. She laughed softly when a man told a corny joke, crouched down to the little girl's eye level when taking her pancake order, and whispered a kind word to a tired mother who looked like she hadn't slept in days. But if you looked past the surface, you could see the cracks. Her eyes carried shadows beneath them, the kind that come from too many sleepless nights. Her shoulders sagged slightly when she thought no one was watching. And her bandaged hand, it wasn't just a small cut or scrape. It was the kind of injury that should have kept her resting at home. Yet here she was, pushing through the pain, determined not to slow down. Why? The man in the corner wondered the same thing. Why would someone work themselves so hard when clearly they were hurting? Why not take a break, call in sick, or at least ask for help? The answer would come later, but in that moment, it was still a mystery. For now, all that was visible was a young woman trying to hold her world together with one good hand and a smile. The man folded his newspaper and set it aside. He leaned back, studying her more closely. Something about her struck him, not just her injury, but her spirit. She wasn't like the others who clocked in and out, waiting for the shift to end. There was something deeper in the way she worked, almost as if every plate she carried and every smile she gave mattered more than just tips or a paycheck. When she passed by his table, balancing a tray awkwardly against her hip, he caught a glimpse of her hand again. The bandage had loosened slightly, revealing faint bruises along her wrist. He noticed the way her jaw tightened as she placed the cup down carefully, making sure not to let the pain show. "Everything okay?" he asked casually, his voice low. Emily froze for half a second, her practiced smile flickering. Then she nodded quickly, brushing it off. "Yes, sir, everything's fine. Just a little clumsy, that's all." And with that, she hurried away before he could ask anything more. But he knew. Something wasn't fine. Something was very wrong. And as he sat there watching her limp back to the counter, one thought settled firmly in his mind. This young woman had a story, and it was a story he needed to hear. Because sometimes, what seems like an ordinary morning in a diner is actually the beginning of something extraordinary. The breakfast rush finally began to thin. The clatter of dishes softened, and the conversations that once filled every corner of Maple Street Diner drifted into a quieter hum. Sunlight now streamed through the windows at a softer angle, painting long shadows across the worn checkerboard floor. The once crowded booths emptied, leaving behind only a few scattered customers, those who weren't in a hurry to be anywhere. Emily exhaled softly, leaning against the counter for a moment. She rubbed her good hand across her forehead, brushing back strands of hair that had escaped her bun. Her injured wrist throbbed beneath the makeshift bandage, and she pressed it against her apron, hoping to numb the ache. Even in that quiet moment, she never allowed her face to betray how badly it hurt. She had learned the art of disguising pain with a smile. From the corner booth, the quiet man who had been watching her all morning decided it was time. He set down his empty coffee cup, folded his paper neatly, and raised his hand, not with the impatient snap she had endured from others, but with a gentle wave. Emily straightened quickly, tugging at her apron as she approached. "Refill, sir?" she asked, her voice warm but tired. "Yes, please," the man replied softly. He waited until she poured the coffee, careful not to wince as she balanced the pot in her good hand. Then, before she could walk away, he spoke again. "May I ask, what happened to your hand?" The question startled her. Customers rarely noticed, and when they did, they brushed it off with a joke or a quick, "Hope you get better soon." This man's tone was different. It wasn't casual curiosity. It was concern. Emily hesitated, her eyes flickering downward. For a moment, she seemed ready to offer the same rehearsed excuse she had used on others. But something about his gaze, calm, steady, almost fatherly, made her pause. She sighed, her shoulders lowering as if she were carrying a weight too heavy to keep hidden any longer. "I slipped," she admitted. Quietly. "At my other job. It was late, I was exhausted, and I just lost my balance. Landed wrong." She tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. The man tilted his head. "Your other job?" Emily nodded, her voice lowering as though sharing a secret. "Yes. After my shift here, I work nights at the grocery store. Stocking shelves." She glanced at her bandaged wrist. "That's where this happened. But I couldn't afford to miss work, so," she let her words trail off and forced a small smile. The man's brow furrowed. "You're working 2 jobs. And with an injury like that." Emily shrugged, her smile faltering. "Rent doesn't pay itself. And, my mom." Her voice softened at the mention. "She's sick. Has been for a while. Medication, doctor visits, bills, it all adds up. I can't let her go without what she needs, so I just keep going." Her eyes grew glassy, but she quickly blinked away the tears. She didn't want pity. She wasn't telling him this to complain. She had simply run out of strength to keep the truth locked inside. The man sat back in silence, his coffee untouched. He studied her, not the uniform she wore or the tray she carried, but the raw honesty in her words. This wasn't just a waitress with a bandaged hand. This was a daughter carrying the weight of an entire household on her shoulders. A young woman fighting battles no one else could see. Emily must have sensed his sympathy because she quickly straightened and forced a brighter expression. "Please don't worry," she said softly. "I'll be fine. I just need to keep pushing through a little longer." But her attempt at reassurance only deepened the ache in his chest. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, see the pain she was trying so desperately to mask. She had given him a glimpse into her world, a world where sleep was a luxury, where every paycheck vanished before it could even be held, where love for her mother was the only thing stronger than her pain. For a moment, the man considered revealing who he was. He could have said it right there, that he wasn't just another customer, that he was the owner of the diner she had poured her energy into day after day. But something stopped him. He realized she wasn't speaking to him because she thought he had power. She was speaking because, for once, someone had asked and truly wanted to hear her answer. So instead, he offered her something else. Something simple, but real. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "But even the strongest need rest." Emily gave him a grateful smile, though her eyes still carried the heaviness of her burdens. She excused herself to check on another table, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As she walked away, her limp more noticeable than before, the man's heart tightened. He thought about how many times he had walked into his own diner and seen only the surface, the neatly dressed servers, the smiles that greeted customers, the steady flow of plates and cups. But behind it all were people like Emily. People who showed up, no matter what they were carrying, and gave more of themselves than anyone realized. And in that moment, he understood something profound. The true strength of his business wasn't the food, the decor, or even the loyal customers. It was people like Emily. People who poured not just coffee, but pieces of themselves into every shift. The man sat back, his decision forming quietly but firmly in his mind. He knew he couldn't let her keep struggling alone. He had the power to change her story. But she didn't know that yet. As Emily disappeared into the kitchen with an empty tray, he whispered to himself, "She has no idea what's coming." And for the first time in years, the undercover owner felt a stirring in his chest, an urgency not just to run a diner, but to make a difference. Because sometimes, the smallest act of listening can open the door to the greatest act of compassion. The next morning, the diner was unusually quiet when Emily pushed open the heavy glass door. She was early, as always. The sky outside still wore its pale dawn colors, and the first streaks of sunlight stretched across the empty booths. The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, but the usual clatter of pans and chatter of cooks hadn't yet filled the space. Something felt different. Emily adjusted the strap of her worn shoulder bag and stepped inside, her shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. She expected to find the manager setting up, but instead her eyes landed on the counter. There, in the middle of the polished wood, was a small white envelope with her name written across it in neat handwriting. Emily. She froze. Her first thought was worry. Had she done something wrong yesterday? Had someone complained about her slow service? The idea of losing this job, the one steady lifeline she had, made her stomach twist. With trembling fingers, she picked up the envelope and carefully tore it open. Inside, there was a folded note. She unfolded it slowly, her breath catching as she read the words. Your kindness to others has not gone unnoticed. You give more than you have, even when you are hurting. That is real strength. From today, you will receive full pay while you recover, and your mother's medical bills will be covered. Thank you for reminding me what courage looks like, the owner. Emily read the words twice, then a third time, hardly believing they were real. Her lips parted in shock as tears welled in her eyes. She clutched the letter against her chest, her breath uneven. For so long, she had been carrying her burdens alone, convinced no one saw, no one cared. Yet here was proof, someone had not only noticed but cared enough to change everything. Her hands shook as she pulled out the second item inside the envelope. It was a check. A real check, the amount written in bold numbers so large her vision blurred. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom from the crushing weight of overdue bills, freedom from the fear of losing her mother's care, freedom from the endless cycle of exhaustion. A sob broke free from her chest, and she pressed a hand over her mouth to quiet herself. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "This can't be real, this can't be real." That was when she heard footsteps behind her. Emily turned quickly, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. Standing a few feet away was the man from the corner booth, the quiet one who had asked about her hand. But now, there was no newspaper in his hand, no attempt to blend into the crowd. He looked at her with a gentle smile, his eyes warm with something deeper than simple kindness. "It's real," he said softly. "Every word of it." Emily blinked at him in confusion. "You wrote this?" He nodded. "Yes, I'm the owner of this diner." Her mouth fell open. She stared at him, speechless, her mind spinning. This man she had served coffee to, this man she thought was just another customer, he had been the owner all along. She tried to form words, but only fragments came out. I don't understand, why me? Why would you?" He stepped closer, his voice steady, carrying both authority and compassion. "Because I saw you. I saw the way you carried yourself yesterday. You were hurting, but you never stopped giving. You showed more strength with one broken hand than most people do with two. You reminded me of something I had forgotten, that this diner isn't built on food or furniture. It's built on people like you." Emily's tears spilled freely now. She shook her head in disbelief. I don't deserve this. I was just doing my job. No, he said firmly but kindly. You were doing more than your job. You were giving pieces of yourself to everyone who walked through that door. That's rare, Emily. And it deserves to be honored. Her legs trembled, and she sank onto one of the stools at the counter, clutching the letter and check as though they might disappear if she let go. She felt like she was dreaming, like any second she would wake up and find herself racing between two jobs again, counting every dollar, praying her mother's medicine wouldn't run out. But the man's presence grounded her. His sincerity left no room for doubt. Emily whispered through her tears, "You don't know what this means to me, to my mom. We've been holding on by a thread. And now, it feels like someone finally cut the rope that was choking us." The man's eyes softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on the counter near hers. Then let this be a new chapter. Focus on healing. Be with your mom. You've carried the weight alone long enough. Let someone else carry it for a while. For the first time in years, Emily felt the tightness in her chest loosen. It was as if the universe itself had paused to give her a breath of relief. She let out a shaky laugh, half from disbelief, half from overwhelming gratitude. You've changed my life, she whispered. The owner smiled gently. No, Emily. You changed mine first. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of gratitude, compassion, and the quiet understanding that their lives had both been altered forever. Later that morning, as the diner slowly filled with customers again, Emily moved through the room with a different kind of lightness. For once, she didn't feel invisible. For once, the smile on her face wasn't forced. And as the undercover owner watched from the counter, he felt something stir inside him, something more valuable than profit or success. He had been reminded of the very thing that made life worth living, the power of kindness to transform a life in ways nothing else could.